Welcome to The Explainer. If you look at literally any modern media feed today, you're watching conflicting headlines overlap in real time. It's wild. One source is going to call a crowd a peaceful gathering, while another instantly labels it a dangerous mob. A new economic policy gets framed as this brilliant rescue mission in one headline, and then an absolute catastrophic failure in the next. It's just this massive sensory overload of conflicting information and chaotic overlap. So today, we're going to break down exactly why this happens, and how the invisible architecture of power is actually designed to control meaning itself. Here's the crazy part. Physical reality doesn't change, but the meaning we attach to it, that absolutely does. Think about it for a second. The physical event, what actually happened in the real world, is totally static. A bill was signed, a speech was given. But the way people describe it, the specific words they choose, and the emotions they attach to it, those vary wildly. And this split right here between reality and interpretation is where influence becomes incredibly powerful. Because if you can control the interpretation, you don't even need to change the facts. You just change what those facts mean to the audience. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, defining the narrative. What exactly is it? Look, a narrative isn't just a bunch of raw data. It's actually a deliberate architecture built right around it. If you think of scattered facts as isolated data points, the narrative is the framework that forces them into a cohesive, digestible storyline. And there's a reason for this. As humans, our brains are literally wired for stories. We just don't process isolated data well. We crave a beginning, a middle, and an end. Narratives do that for us. They give us a framework to safely and easily understand the world without us having to do the exhausting work of analyzing every single fact independently. Facts are fixed, right? But meaning? Meaning is incredibly malleable, and it's shaped entirely by language, context, and repetition. Let's say a company's profits drop by 5%. Okay, that's a fact. But is it just a minor expected market correction, or is it the catastrophic beginning of the end for that business? Well, that is the narrative. The what happened is completely non-negotiable, but the what it means is entirely up for grabs. And that meaning is shaped by the exact language used, the context provided, and honestly how often that interpretation gets repeated to all of us. Moving along to Section 2, constructing the storyline. How are these things actually built? Building a storyline isn't an accident. It requires deliberate, sequential editorial choices. In fact, constructing a narrative is honestly just as much about what you leave out as what you put in. If you cover in a massive event, you obviously can't show every single angle. So you have to choose what's included, and crucially, what's excluded. Then you decide how to frame it. Is it a story of triumph, or is it a tragedy? And finally, whose voices get amplified? Who gets the microphone? These are highly calculated decisions that systematically build out our perception of reality. This quote is absolutely crucial. Framing is exactly like placing a camera lens right over reality. If you use a super tight, zoomed-in lens on a specific conflict, well, it looks like an isolated incident. But if you swap that out for a wide-angle lens, suddenly it looks like part of a massive, systemic issue. And this applies to everything, from your local city council meeting to some tense international summit. The perspective from which the story is told dictates our reaction. Ultimately, whoever controls the frame has essentially predetermined the audience's conclusion. And then there's this. Over time, just through sheer systematic repetition, a totally subjective interpretation transforms into perceived truth. It's a very real psychological phenomenon called the illusory truth effect. If you hear a specific phrase or a catchy headline enough times across different channels, your brain actually stops questioning it. It stops feeling like an opinion and just starts feeling like common sense. The entire architecture of power relies on this. Echo the same narrative across TV, social media, and public statements, and boom. A constructed storyline solidifies into unshakable reality. Which brings us to Section 3, competing parallel realities. Essentially, a narrative battlefield. We see the same event produce totally competing interpretations all the time. We usually think, oh, we're just disagreeing on opinions here, like whether a policy is good or bad, but actually scratch that, that is not what's happening anymore. We are often operating from entirely different baseline realities. One person's newsfeed has fed them one highly curated set of facts, and the next person's feed has fed them completely different ones. So you aren't just debating opinions with your neighbor, you're debating from entirely different narrative frameworks. It's really wild when you step back and look at it. These competing frameworks create a major split. In the past, we kind of shared this single world reality. Everyone watched the same evening news, read the same paper. We might have argued over what to do about the news, but we generally agreed on what the news actually was. Today, we live in parallel realities. Two people living in the exact same house can experience a completely different version of global events. just because their information ecosystems are totally siloed off from one another. So how does this spread so fast? Let's look at Section 4, the amplification machine. These narratives don't just spread on their own. They are absolutely turbocharged by specific modern mechanisms. Recommendation algorithms and engagement-based ranking, they don't just casually organize content. They act as massive acceleration engines for whichever storyline provokes the biggest reaction. And those viral feedback loops just guarantee that the more a narrative is shared, the more prominent it gets. It's a self-sustaining cycle. These platforms aren't just neutral public squares. They are finely tuned engines built for maximum acceleration. This is a real game changer to understand. The most visible content in your feed, yeah, it's rarely the most accurate. It's simply the most engaging. The algorithms governing our media literally do not have an accuracy metric. They only have an attention metric. If a totally factual, highly nuanced story is boring, it becomes invisible. But if a heavily framed, sensationalized narrative grabs eyeballs, it goes viral. Because attention determines visibility, our very perception of reality is being warped by whatever is the most clickable. Which obviously leads us to a huge question. What actually drives this algorithmic engagement in the first place? What makes a narrative so irresistible to us? Let's dive into Section 5, Emotion, Behavior, and Belief. This is where the algorithm meets the human mind. To win the war for your attention, a narrative literally has to hit you right in the gut. We're talking primal emotional triggers. Fear is a major survival mechanism. If a headline makes you afraid, you're gonna click it, for sure. Identity and belonging tap into our need for community. Narratives that say we are right, they are wrong feel so validating. And outrage? Outrage is the absolute gold standard online right now. Content that makes us angry spreads so much faster than content that makes us happy. And the architects of meaning know exactly what they're doing. I love this quote because it sums the whole thing up perfectly. We all love to think we're these deeply rational, logical creatures, right? Analyzing all the data. But the uncomfortable truth is, we are intensely emotional. Once a narrative successfully triggers our fear or our outrage, the logical brain basically just shuts down. We adopt a belief because it feels right and because it validates how we already feel. The narrative wins not by bringing the best facts to the table, but by provoking the strongest feelings. So, as we wrap this up, remember this. Reality isn't just what happens, it's how it's understood. The institutions and algorithms we interact with every single day are constantly pushing constructed storylines at us. So, the next time you're scrolling through your feed and you feel that sudden, massive spike of outrage or fear, take a breath and ask yourself, are you actually reacting to the facts of what happened, or are you just a soldier fighting in someone else's narrative war? Keep questioning the frame, and we'll see you next time.